Outfielders 10 through 12 for Scott. We have the Jacksons, Chourio, and Merrill, and then Ronald Acuna down at 12. And then for Chris, it's Jarren Duran, Jackson Chourio, and Jazz Chisholm. So the only difference here is that Scott has Jackson Merrill ahead of Jazz, and Chris has it vice versa. Scott, why do you hate Jazz? No, you have them like one spot apart. So, but why do you prefer Jackson Merrill over Jazz Chisholm, I guess?
So the reason I moved Acuna, getting back to that, where I did 12th behind Jackson Chourio and Jackson Merrill, is because that's the point where I determined we're dropping from first-round caliber bats potentially to high-end bats, but not first-round caliber. I think Jazz Chisholm is outside of that discussion, given his injury history and given his limited ceiling with batting average. So I do think Jackson Merrill, as we talked about on the last podcast, does have the potential to produce like a first rounder because he's already he's just built for batting average, you know? To hit 292 as a rookie, he had an expected batting average of 308, 98th percentile. His expected batting average, low strikeout rate, good line drive rate. Just that is arguably the safest part of Jackson Merrill's profile, and it's the one that we were just saying a minute ago. That's the stat that's most critical to fill in the early rounds. Meanwhile, he had a combined 40 home runs and stolen bases, and this was, as a 20-year-old, didn't really get going until June. He kind of produced a hollow batting average before then, but most of his actual production came from June 1st on. And factoring all that in, the comfort level that's going to come from having already spent a year in the majors, I think it's very likely Jackson Merrill is just, we're having this conversation next year leading into 2026. I think it's very likely we are talking about him as a first rounder.
I agree with everything you said about Jazz regarding the batting average downside, the injury risk, 100%. Played a career high 147 games, hadn't played more than 124 before that. I also think he might have first round upside. Even if he hits 250 or 260, his 150 game pace once he went to the Yankees was 35 homers and 58 steals. Nobody is expecting that, but I don't know that it's impossible either.
About half of that was spent playing through that elbow injury.
Yeah.
Remember, he rushed back from that elbow injury, and it affected his performance. But, like, he put up those numbers while dealing with UCL damage in his left elbow, right? That was the injury. So, like, that's where, for me, if I'm going to push guys up for stolen bases, you know, you mentioned there being like a 30 to 50 steal gap between Yordan Alvarez and Corbin Carroll. Mm-hmm. It's probably not going to be that pronounced, but there could be a 30 steal gap between Jazz Chisholm and Jackson Merrill. Like, I think that is possible. The Yankees were surprisingly aggressive with Jazz Chisholm on the base paths. There's a reason we got excited when he got traded there, and then we saw it in action. We saw what we hoped to see from Jazz Chisholm. I think there's a chance he's batting leadoff for the Yankees next year too. I think we're all assuming Gleyber Torres is going somewhere else, not returning to the Yankees, and I think Jazz is probably the most likely full-time leadoff hitter unless you really believe in Anthony Volpe. I don't know where they are on him at this point, but that could be a really good situation. I acknowledge the injury risk fully. That is a big drawback on Jazz Chisholm, and if you can't justify that price, I think that's perfectly reasonable. But I do think the 5, call it 4 categories, if you don't want to say batting average, potential there for Jazz is really, really high.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just note he had 74 runs and 73 RBI this past year. Even with the Yankees.
He played most of his season with the Marlins.
Well, but even with the Yankees, his run and RBI pace wasn't good. He was batting 6th mostly, so you can kind of understand. If he bats leadoff, that would certainly change expectations there. But I think Jazz Chisholm is from a 5x5 perspective. You give him good health. You assume he delivers close to his full potential. You're hoping for like Francisco Lindor production. And I do think Francisco Lindor, with his last 2 years, has put himself on the fringe of first round status there. But, just a year ago, we were drafting him late second round. So that's more what I view Jazz Chisholm as being than, with Jackson Merrill, we're talking about Kyle Tucker type upside, I think.